Hello, and welcome to Getting Simply the Best Results podcast. This is your host, Cheryl Jones of simplythebestresults.com, and today we have a wonderful guest with us. This podcast is all about how do you get the best results in your life in various areas. And our guest today is Miss Sara Canaday, and she is a keynote speaker, award-winning author, and former corporate executive who helps arm professionals with strategies and practices they need to make the critical shift from informed to influential, from doer to driver, and from manager to leader. She works with Fortune 500 companies who are committed to helping their managers strengthen their leadership skills, improve business relationships, and enhance their performance. When she's not speaking or working with her clients, she's cheering on her son's football team, hiding new shoe purchases from her husband and her 17-year-old daughter, or ordering double cappuccino at Starbucks. Please join me in welcoming speaker, consultant, and wannabe Cupcake Wars judge, Miss Sara Canaday. Welcome, Sara.
Thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
We're so pleased to have you today because I know there's so much that you can share with us. So I want to really get into it right away. And you know, I've known you for quite a while now, but I don't know a lot about your background. So, I didn't know you were a corporate executive. You look like one, but I didn't know that part of your history. So, would you tell me a little bit more about your background, kind of how you got to be this dynamic consultant, speaker, author?
Certainly. I spent about 13 years in the very sexy industry of insurance. Yeah,
Ooh.
So I started out I started out in property and casualty and then went on to work in the workers' comp insurance industry. Now, I am not trained and certified as a claims adjuster or an underwriter. Those years I spent in corporate were primarily in sales and operations, and worked my way up from an individual contributor right out of college. When I exited corporate, I had made it to the level of VP of operations. During that time, I think I did what a lot of people did to climb the corporate ladder. I went on to get my MBA, put in a lot of hours, took on, different projects to expand my reach and my experience. And don't get me wrong, it wasn't all, unicorns and fairies. I had a lot of fits and starts moving up the corporate ladder, but for the most part, had a somewhat traditional trajectory.
Interesting. Is that what you went to school for?
I went to school for my undergraduate degree, interestingly enough, was in organizational communication. So I've always had a love for the people side of the business, and I always tell people it was my ego that kept me in operations. Because really, if you line up outside the CEO's office and you are in HR or you're in training and development or marketing, you're going to stand behind the CFO, the finance guy, the operations guy, and the sales guy. And so I always wanted sort of to be at the table where some of the bigger decisions were made, but have always had a love for the people side of the business, the leadership side of the business.
Yeah, and you're very good at that. Definitely. I've seen you in action, and the way you relate to people is just really positive and inspirational. Definitely. Well, in that time, maybe, back then or even more recently, is there a skill or a characteristic that you feel has really helped you, bring out the best results, and whether it was in the insurance industry or now as a consultant?
There is, and in fact, I didn't even know that there was actually a word for it, but it's called pre-crastination, and it's exactly what you might be thinking. Yes, instead of procrastinating, I'm actually a precrastinator. So For years, I've had a tendency to do things ahead of time. I know it sounds really strange and a little bit. Yeah, a little bit obsessive, but I've had this tendency to always do things right away. The minute I know something is due, is expected of me, I tend to jump on things right away. I've always done that, and I think two reasons. One is it was subconsciously, I think, I knew that I had a very low tolerance to work under pressure. I'm just not good at being at my best under pressure. Now, I say that. I live with somebody, my husband, who is actually very good at it. He can have a presentation due, and the night before he starts working on it, and he knocks it out of the park. Wow. I, however, am not wired that way. And it will just cause me added stress. So I think for years I didn't know that's why I did it. I think I'm old enough now to recognize that it's something, it's just a self-awareness I have. So I do things in advance. The other reason I do them, and I think this is something that I really honed while I was in corporate as a leader, is that so much of your day is fighting fires and things that were unanticipated. And knowing that, I used to do as much as I could because I just anticipated that I would be pulled in different directions, and I wouldn't have the time or the energy maybe to put into the bigger goals and the bigger projects that I had in front of me. So yeah, pre-crastination. That is I've never heard that term before. Of course, I knew what procrastination was, definitely, because I have experienced that, no doubt, and practiced it. But that is so interesting, and that you were able to have the awareness that you were likely to be distracted or pulled off of task. To have that forethought and that awareness, to me, is fascinating. Yes, that happens to me all day, but I just thought it was squirrel syndrome, which I'm real clear that I get distracted by squirrels and shiny things. So, so gosh, if I had a little of this procrastination, no telling how much better off I'd be. What do you think that's just in your DNA, or do you think that's something that, do you remember an incident or a situation that, caused you to take that on? I think it's two things. I think it is partly my DNA. In fact, I think it's a big part of my DNA, but I also think that I had enough experience with being completely stressed out because I was under the gun, that I wanted to avoid it. I wanted to avoid that feeling at all costs. So I think it's a combination of two. And don't get me wrong, like any strength taken too far, this could actually get in the way, right? I mean, especially nowadays, we have a bias for action, and that sounds like it's a good thing, but not always, because there are times when I have moved too quickly, right? And if I had just been more patient, something else may have developed that would have helped me put together a better deliverable or a better package, or frankly, make a better decision. So I have to still, like any other strength, I have to make sure that I don't overuse it.
Gotcha. And that makes sense to me, because sometimes when I'm developing things, I notice that it's like the whole idea hasn't really come into formulation yet, and the closer I get to its due date, the more clarity I have. And I'm not doing it total last minute anymore. However, it seems like there's a sweet spot of clarity, kind of thing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so that you had this procrastination skill set, if you will, all, I guess, from a young age, and it's just kind of continuously paid off in terms of being ready, except for when it didn't. Is that kind of how it worked?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Is that something you would recommend that either we work toward developing, or or is it something develop in moderation, or are there certain times it's better to have that skill than others?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we're obviously right now in unprecedented times, and I think we may even feel a little stymied right now because it is so unprecedented and people don't know what's coming next, and so it's almost hard to be a procrastinator when there's so many unknowns. But I would say to try it on with the things that you do know and that you can act on. And I think, even if that's something that you need to pivot and change moving forward, the whole point of taking action and moving is going to help you get off center, right? I've seen all too often that people spend a lot of their time and energy researching something or trying to learn different things before they actually do it. And to me, they don't even realize that subconsciously they're procrastinating. In their mind, they're doing research or they're arming themselves with, training or, how-tos, but really what may be going on is they're simply just procrastinating. So, it's not for everybody. And like I said, some people actually flourish when they are waiting till the last minute for whatever reason. The pressure is a fuel to them, and it marshals up some sort of an energy for them that maybe they didn't have before. So it is, you have to know your own, constitution and what works for you and what doesn't.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know the evolution kind of your business, because you're in the insurance industry and now you're a speaker, author, and consultant, or whichever order you want to put them in. And I'm wondering about that jump and how you made that jump and kind of that evolution that's taken place.
Sure. Well, I mentioned before that I've always had a love and affinity for the people side of the business, the culture side, the leadership side. I had a stint while I was in corporate as a manager for OD, which is short for organizational development. And I loved my role. It was about a 2-year role as a manager. And the only reason I left and went back into operations, that it was opportunity to move into a senior role, senior leader position. So it was an upgrade for me in terms of position, and I knew I would learn more. But if it weren't for that, I'm not sure what I would have left that particular role. But what led me to make the jump altogether out of corporate, frankly, was I was, and this is 18 years ago, and there were not the micro innovations that there are today. So, once we kind of cast and set the plan in motion, a lot of it was about maintaining. There were some evolutions that we had to deal with, but not like today. And so the long and short of it is I really got to a point where I had to say, is this fulfilling? Is this something I want to be doing long term? Is there something more for me? What is my real purpose here, and what feeds me, and what aligns with what I want to do and what's under my hood, so to speak. So it started some self-reflection. I worked with a career coach, and I began to see that the next step for me might be, out on my own. It wasn't something that I ever thought I would do. I have no problem working for somebody else. I never had dreams to have my own business, but the more I started working with this coach, she really got me to change my paradigms about what I thought that meant, because I was also very burnt out, and I thought working for myself just meant, instead of 65 hours, it was going to be 85. And so I had to really work through what it would mean for me, not to mention, very traditional upbringing. You never leave a job until you have one. And that was at the very, I would say, very early stages of what people used to call their plan B. The term now is simply having a side hustle. So then I started doing my plan B while I was working, because I began to find something that was really of interest to me, which was coaching and training and speaking around communication and professional presence. And I started taking on some certifications and whatnot while I was still working, and I would do it, after hours. And eventually, got to the point where I had enough overtime piled up, overtime pay, that is, comp time is what they used to call it, so that I could leave and start my own kind of boutique firm. And, what was interesting is that same year that I left the company to start my own business, I got pregnant with my first baby. And so, it was an interesting, evolution, because I purposely went slowly in building my business so that I could be at home and maybe get help 2 days a week, but still build the business slowly. And that's how it happened. It was the best thing.
That is very strategic. You were birthing a child and birthing a business at the same time.
At the same time. Yes. I wouldn't recommend that, by the way. It was not strategic.
I understand completely. Yes. Definitely. Similar situation, but I'd already been in business for a little while, but I was still growing it right when my first one came along. So that's pretty funny. Yeah, because there is some similarities. The pain and the struggle and the balance of everything is a challenge. Definitely a challenge.
It is.
So you spent a lot of time and were interested in that and the communication side of things and the professional presence. And now you're seen as a leadership expert. And I know that you just, I think it was just last year, released a new book called Leadership Unchained. And I would love it if you could tell us a little bit about that and why you chose that title.
Sure, I'd love to. So, like you, Cheryl, when we're out there with leaders, whether we're keynoting or doing a workshop, we get a chance to hear from them weekly, daily, and hear about their struggles. And there was a common thread that I kept hearing among those that I coached or spoke to, and that was that, they were exhausted and they felt like nothing more than walking to-do lists and fighting fires, firefighters, and that they were beginning to lose what it meant to be a leader, right? They wanted the sense of achievement that came with helping the company evolve, the bigger projects, not just the everyday tactical. And that caused me to reflect and think about how best to serve leaders, right? Whether I was coaching them in the moment or whether I was speaking to them. And before I knew it, that evolved into pieces that I would write as a blog post, or I would find myself coaching leaders and thinking, man, this would be great for a book. And so what I discovered is a lot of what works or used to work in the past, even the success principles I knew to work as a leader, were no longer working in today's business landscape. So, the doing more, staying more tethered, that is not necessarily getting these leaders traction, and it's not necessarily fulfilling them. So my book is all about counterintuitive strategies to meet today's demands. And interestingly enough, the first chapter is one I need to learn the most, which is this idea of a bias for action and turning that on its head and making time for a strategic pause, or what I call a mental time in, right? And that's where you actually get to sit and think about everything you've been consuming, reading, listening to in meetings, and making sense of them, making connections that weren't firing in the moment because you were too distracted, right? Or prioritizing, or remembering what you circled in a notepad that you wanted to take action on that normally would never see the light of day because you got pulled off and distracted right after leaving that meeting. So that's just one example of the book, right? There's 6 others that are those success strategies that we need to think differently about in today's landscape.
Well, I'm curious to know a little bit more. This, you talk about a strategic pause, or and I get what you're saying, a bias for action, like go do, make that decision now. Okay, I've lived that. It's like, I get an idea and I act on it, and that's part of my personality, but that's also what inspires me, right?
Sure.
However, what you're saying about taking a strategic pause makes so much sense to me in terms of just trying to assimilate is kind of the word that's coming to me, assimilate all these different ideas and what makes sense, how to put them together in a way that is of most value, rather than just acting on the first idea that comes to mind. How, if you were going to do that, and all right, this is really for my personal information, I'm sure our audience will love to know too, how would you structure a strategic pause? Or do I need to buy the book to go learn how to do that?
No. It's actually very simple. For most people, it would serve them to just every Friday morning, instead of, launching right into their virtual team meetings. It used to be we'd drive into work, but these days it's
right.
Before jumping on those calls, go out the back patio, take your coffee, turn off your email notifications, and for an hour, look at everything that's been on your calendar, reread notes, maybe read the articles that the headline looked like it would be helpful, but you didn't have time to read it in the moment. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's even technology. Maybe you heard of an app or a software program that could really help make your job more efficient. But again, you put that in a do later file because you can't even figure out how to use the darn thing. And it could really be helping you. Anything. It's just a time for letting those things all come together in a very, uninterrupted time, right? It's uninterrupted time. Now, that's only one way. For some people, it's taking a walk. There's something about movement that if there's been something on their mind they cannot figure out, or they haven't been able to get creative about, taking a walk and freeing their mind of some of this other clutter is what helps things to start locking into place. I know that happens for me. Sometimes, I walk mostly daily, but sometimes I don't get to walk until middle of the day or middle afternoon. But just walking away from my computer, something that I've been kind of struggling with, all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, that's such an easy solution. Why didn't I think of that? Right? For some people, it can be getting on a bike and it's their commute to work, or it looks different for everybody. But the main thing is, this isn't about mindfulness. It's not about meditating. It is just a way to say, this is my hour, and I'm going to go back to some things that I have been putting aside, or that I can reread so that I can see, are there some connections here? Can I make those alignments, as you said?
That makes a lot of sense. And until you said, I was trying to imagine myself stepping out on the back porch on Friday morning with my cup of coffee, and I thought, oh, that sounds nice, And but then when you mentioned walking, I will sometimes, not as regular as I like, but walk in the morning before the sun comes up, or as the sun is coming up. And there's actually a benefit to doing that when it's dark. It's harder to see your neighbors' homes and look at their yards, or get distracted by their flower beds, or sometimes you get the benefit of seeing wildlife that you didn't expect to cross paths with. And you're absolutely right. There is something about that movement. It really frees up your mind. And for me, the treadmill, I can't get the same effect from it. But if I walk the street, walk the neighborhood, and especially if it's just dawn, coming up, the sun's coming up kind of thing, the quietness of it and not being able to focus real clearly on distractions allows me to see into my own brain a little bit better. So that's fascinating. Right. Yeah. I'm glad you mentioned that. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, the metaphor with the treadmill, I mean, that's probably the last thing we need to do is jump on the treadmill.
It goes back to being chained, kind of thing. It's bringing that chained analogy back, so versus unchained. I can see the connection now. Definitely. Yeah. So are there some things that you've personally learned from some of the concepts in the book as you've applied them? Surely you must have learned something about this, and are starting to practice more and more this idea of the strategic pause. But are there some other things that have been real valuable to you?
Oh, yeah. And it's one of those things, the nice way of saying it is, we teach what we need to learn. The more crass way of saying it is, I need to eat my own dog food. Or, the classier way was drink my own champagne. I like that one. I heard that one the other day.
I like that too.
Yeah. And I'm still learning. I mean, the bias for action is a work in progress for me because I have a propensity to move and to take action.
Mm-hmm.
The other one that's in my book is about being really diligent and having a take no prisoners attitude about what gets your time and attention. And
tell me more about that. Yeah.
Yeah, that means that you are not only making a to-do list, but you're making a stop doing list. And that is another work in progress for me. And I had an experience year before last that really taught me this lesson well. I was having my sort of annual mini planning retreat, and I gathered, 3 or 4 people that have been on my team that have helped me with my business and still do. And I had a colleague say to me, good friend and colleague who's in the business, say, why don't you let me facilitate that planning retreat so that you can participate instead of trying to do both, facilitate and participate. Long story short, he was up on a whiteboard. We had a big pie chart, and we were talking about the percentage of my business that was, online training versus executive coaching versus keynoting. We had all my deliverables up, and then he asked me to move forward on what I wanted those percentages to be the next year. And his question after that was critical because, again, I'm ready to move forward. Once I saw the new percentages, I said, okay, great. What do we need to do to make those shifts in the percentages? And he said, no, I'm going to stop you. And I think the better question is, what do you need to let go of in order to reach those goals? And it was a very different approach to planning. But let me tell you, it was very powerful. Very powerful.
Wow.
And so that's just an example of some of the learnings that I've had from the concepts in the book.
That's a brilliant question. It makes total sense. And that idea of stop doing, oh boy, I'm going to go back and look at my to-do list and look and see. And I tend to be one of those people when a friend is in need, I drop what I'm doing. I put my stuff on hold and try to handle their crises, which they're fine. It's not that they really need me. They're fine. Right. But I want to be of service. So that can be a detriment. There's something right there that I am taking away from this conversation about, you know what, let them go to voicemail, kind of thing.
Right.
So
if you're in the
really,
zone, yeah, very
helpful. Yeah. Well, that's so cool. I'm so excited about what I'm learning today.
Good.
So, if you were to go back in time, and I've heard therapists and other types of people say, if you were to look back and be able to travel back in time and talk to your younger self, and try to encourage her as she's starting out and give her some guidance, is there something you might tell her that would help save some struggle or something?
Yes, without a doubt. I would say to her, don't take yourself so seriously.
That's a brilliant
exactly
one.
What I would say. Yeah, I've had to learn that one the hard way. And it's, again, it's another work in progress for me, frankly. I just, playfulness is something that I always work on bringing into my world, whether it's work or home or family. But yeah, that is certainly one that I wish I had messages like that much earlier on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Something along that same lines that I've adopted there is, because perfectionism, I have a little perfectionism in me, but I can't quite ever get it there, is sloppy success. Now, it doesn't mean be sloppy in your intention, but,
Right.
you know, in doing something, it means give it your all. And if it's not perfect, let it be okay. It's, you know, let it be okay. Because you spend a whole lot more time. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And not to beat yourself up about it either. And that's what I hear you saying. Relax, have fun, enjoy. You know, this may be the only trip we get. We should probably enjoy it, you know.
Exactly.
So, brilliant. Yeah, I like that very much. Has there been somebody who, or something that has had a really big influence on creating you as you are today?
I mean, I think, you know, it's not a very novel answer, but it's certainly, I would say both my mother and my father had a huge influence on me. And luckily they have different, you know, personalities, different approaches, but both have made an impact. Probably my father more so in the business sense. He is an engineer by trade, very methodical, very organized, but he's also just an amazing, he's very ethical, and he's very fair-minded, and he gives everybody the benefit of the doubt. And I really love him for that. But I learned a lot from him. I worked in his office in the summers. Of course, I hated it because it was boring. But I picked up a lot more than I realized, I guess. And, you know, my mother, very, very strong woman, has had a lot of adversity in her life, but I've seen her just walk right through it. And she's been a great example for me. And then I would say, you know, it's the leaders that I've had in my life, both good and bad, who've influenced me. You know, I think I said as much in the past that I would never do what I saw leaders do, as much as I would say, oh, that's really nice. I'm going to remember that approach. So I think good and bad leaders have had an impression on me, have made an impression on me.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. It's like, oh, I don't want to be that person, or yes, I want to be more like that person. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's good. It's good that you have that awareness. A lot of people might just say, oh, that guy was a terrible manager or whatever, and just, you know, try to get as far away from it as possible, not realizing that there was an opportunity to learn something in that moment.
To learn.
You know.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I'm curious, I know that you have 2 books you've already written. So, you know, usually a book is somebody's big thing to do, right? What's the next big thing for you, or what are you focusing on today? Yeah, we're in the middle of this very strange environment of the coronavirus, and so maybe it's changed your focus. And I'm just curious, has it influenced you, and where are you looking these days? What are you planning?
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I think that, you know, all of us have to evolve, not only to the circumstances, but continuously evolve based on what your clients and your, you know, your most loyal customers want and need from you. And so I am planning to just really lean in close and listen and try to discover what leaders most need. I mean, I think, you know, you can't swing a bat right now without reading an article about, you know, crisis communication and how to work remotely and, you know, how to engage remote teams. But I want to know more than that. I want to know what's really going on and what leaders really want. So I'm going to be listening for that. I was already en route to do a lot more virtual work. You know, I've got a couple of big clients they're global, and it wasn't making sense before this to bring me in or have me travel to all their sites. And so I was already working to try to transition some of my work to virtual work. And of course, I do a lot of the LinkedIn learning courses. I'm going to continue that. So I feel very blessed that I did not come to an abrupt halt in my business. I was already moving in that direction. This is going to compel me to probably move faster in that direction. And let me say, it does create a challenge. It's not an easy transition. What works face-to-face doesn't necessarily and usually doesn't work virtually. You have to get a lot more creative and think about how to engage people virtually. So that in and of itself is going to be an opportunity, I'll say, right, for all of us. Yeah,
absolutely.
It'll be an opportunity for all of us. But it is what it is, and we'll move forward.
And we're growing and learning, and it's what is necessary right now,
That's right.
And I would much prefer to be there and shake somebody's hand and hug them or whatever, appropriately, the hug part,
Right.
So, because and read their whole body language, not just their eyes or whatever you might see on the screen. So that really changes things a little bit. We have to kind of intuit maybe a little bit more, maybe ask more direct questions, and as a coach, you would be prepared to easily, get into and pull out those thoughts that if people are willing, to display them, or share them. So, I've seen your LinkedIn learning courses, and they're well done. I recommend them. Anybody who's interested in learning more about leadership and communication and so forth, you've got to check out Sara's LinkedIn learning courses. So definitely, very, very well done. Yeah. So is there any exciting news or anything cool that's coming up that you want anybody to know about that might be fun or we should be on the lookout for?
There is, and the irony is that I'm really trying to strike a balance between respecting what's going on right now and balancing that with the idea that regardless, we've got to move forward. But I just finished what's called the Modern Leader Index. So this is a self-assessment that you can take, and it's free. Nothing I'm selling. If you just look up the Modern Leader Index with my name, Sara Canaday.
Okay.
In fact, I don't even know if you need my name. You can take a free assessment that's based, in part on my book, but that just gets a general sense of how willing and ready you are to shake up the way you work, think, and lead. And this was in the process before COVID-19. So it wasn't something that was related to, how ready are you to disrupt yourself. It was really more related to just we were undergoing massive changes even before that. And so it's something that, your readers or your listeners might be interested in.
Definitely. I'm curious. I want to take it. So
I'm
hoping I'm flexible. Yeah, that would be great. Thanks.
Excellent.
I hope I'm a flexible leader, and ready to stay nimble, and ready to move on. So we'll see. It'll be good. It will be a good what do you call it, self-assessment in terms of I can look back at it and go, oh, wow, I didn't know that about myself. So.
There you go. And I'll keep you honest, and I'll follow up with you to see how you scored and what the recommendations were.
There you go. I can't wait to see that. That'll be great. Well, thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Sure.
Wonderful. Well, I want to thank you, but before we go, I want to make sure that our audience knows how to reach you, how to get in touch with you. So if you could provide your web address and anything else that, maybe social media or whatever, however you'd like people to be in touch with you, that would be really helpful.
Certainly. My web address is my name. So saracanaday.com, and it's CANADAY.com. People miss that last A for some reason, so it's saracanaday.com. And my email address is sarah@saracanaday.com. And, of course, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Twitter, and I'm on Instagram, and I'm on Facebook. So I'm happy to connect with your listeners in any way, shape, or form, or to hear from them via email.
Wonderful. Thank you. And that is Sarah without an H, just to be clear.
Oh, yes. Thank you for that.
You might not, yeah. I have that problem with Cheryl. People think it's spelled with an S, and I spell it with a
right.
C. So,
there
yeah, it is Sarah. Yeah, Sarah without an H, Sara. Wonderful. Well, thank you again so much, Sarah, for being here and for sharing this information today. I feel like I've learned so much about you, and yet I've known you for, 10 years almost.
Exactly.
So y'all be sure to check out the Modern Leader Index and see where you are on the index, as well as go out and buy Sarah's book, Leadership Unchained. That's Unchained, Unchained.